A framed cop wakes up in hospital with no memory. 48 hours later, the truth shatters his department. In the cold, rainy November night, Officer Thomas Mitchell wakes with a start. The sterile hospital room is bathed in a harsh fluorescent light that does little to comfort him. The regular beeping of machines echoes through the silence, a constant reminder of his condition. His head pulses with a piercing pain, each throb sending waves of nausea through his body. He tries to lift his hand to massage his temple, but the IV drip tugs at his skin, restricting his movement. He lets out a frustrated sigh, his breath misting slightly into chilly air. Fragments of memories float through his mind like ghosts. He remembers the call, a routine intervention, or so he thought. The dispatcher's voice had been calm, almost bored, as she relayed the details. A noise disturbance in the East Side neighborhood, known for its rough edges and tight-knit community. He and his partner, Officer Elena Rodriguez, had exchanged a knowing glance before heading out. They'd been partners for years, their bond forged in the crucible of the city streets. They knew the risks, the unpredictability of their job. But nothing could have prepared Thomas for this. A nurse enters, her footsteps soft but echoing in the sterile room. She checks his vitals, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and professional detachment. Behind her, a doctor follows, his face grave. "You've suffered a head trauma, Lieutenant Mitchell. You've been unconscious for almost 2 days." Thomas tries to speak, but his throat is dry, and the words come out as a raspy whisper. What happened?" The doctor sighs, adjusting his glasses. "You were found unconscious at the scene of an intervention. There was an altercation. Do you remember anything?" Thomas searches his memory, but it's like wading through thick fog. He remembers the drive to the neighborhood, the tension in the air as they approach the crowded streets, the faces of the residents, a blur of anger and fear. But after that, it's all a blur. He remembers drawing his weapon, the cold metal a familiar weight in his hand. But the reason, the catalyst for his actions, remains elusive. He shakes his head, frustration welling up inside him. "I don't know. I can't remember." The doctor nods, his expression sympathetic. "It's not uncommon with head injuries. Your memory might come back in fragments, or it might take time. The important thing is not to rush it." Thomas nods, but the sense of urgency within him doesn't abate. He needs to remember, not just for his sake, but for the truth. He knows he wouldn't have fired his weapon without a valid reason, but the black hole in his memory prevents him from defending himself. Then, like a sentence being handed down, the door opens again. Commissioner Robert Hayes enters, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Internal Affairs Agent Martinez, her eyes sharp and scrutinizing. The words fall like guillotine blades. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you're accused of shooting an unarmed civilian during your last intervention. Mr. Ahmed Kader, 26 years old, father of a family, is fighting for his life." Thomas feels his heart stop. Impossible. He would never have fired without valid reason. But the black hole in his memory prevents him from defending himself. He looks at the commissioner, then at Agent Martinez, his mind racing. "There must be a mistake," he manages to say, his voice barely audible. I couldn't have." Commissioner Hayes steps closer, his voice low. "We need to get to the bottom of this, Thomas. For your sake and for the department's." Agent Martinez takes out a notepad, her pen poised. "We need to ask you some questions, Lieutenant. Anything you remember, no matter how small, could be crucial." Thomas nods, his mind still reeling. He knows the drill, the procedure. But this time, he's not the one asking the questions. He's the one under scrutiny. The nurse returns with a cup of water, helping Thomas take a sip. The cool liquid soothes his throat, but it does nothing to ease the turmoil inside him. He looks out the window, the rain streaking down the glass like tears. "Let's start from the beginning," Agent Martinez says, her voice firm yet gentle. "Tell us about the call. What do you remember?" Thomas takes a deep breath, trying to focus. He remembers the dispatcher's voice, the address, the sense of urgency. He remembers his partner, Officer Elena Rodriguez, driving them to the scene. But after that, it's all fragments, disjointed and confusing. "We got the call around 10 p.m., he begins, his voice steadier now. "A noise disturbance in the East Side neighborhood. We've had trouble there before, so we were on high alert." He pauses, trying to piece together the fragments. "We arrived at the scene. There was a crowd, shouting, chaos. I remember seeing a figure, someone running. And then—" He trails off, the memory slipping away like sand through his fingers. Agent Martinez nods, jotting down notes. "And then what, Lieutenant?" Thomas shakes his head, frustration welling up inside him. "I don't know. I can't remember." Commissioner Hayes sighs, running a hand through his hair. "We have witnesses, Thomas. They saw you fire your weapon. We need to understand what happened." Thomas looks at him, desperation in his eyes. "I need to see the evidence. I need to understand this as much as you do." Agent Martinez closes her notepad, her expression thoughtful. "We'll look into it, Lieutenant. In the meantime, try to rest. Your memory might come back with time." As they leave, Thomas is left alone with his thoughts, the beeping of the machines his only company. He knows he has to remember, not just for his sake, but for the truth. Whatever happened that night, he owes it to Ahmed Khader and his family to uncover the truth. The days that follow are a blur of hospital routines and fragmented memories. Thomas is discharged, but placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. He returns home to an empty apartment, the silence echoing his inner turmoil. His apartment, once a sanctuary, now feels like a prison. The walls close in on him as he paces, his mind racing with unanswered questions. He tries to distract himself with mundane tasks, cleaning, cooking, even attempting to read. But his thoughts always circle back to the night of the shooting. He spends hours poring over the case file, trying to piece together the events of that fateful night. The department has provided him with the basic reports, but the crucial details, the ones that could exonerate him, are missing. He knows he needs to dig deeper, but every lead seems to end in a dead end. His partner, Officer Elena Rodriguez, visits him one evening, her face etched with concern. "How are you holding up, Thomas?" she asks, handing him a cup of coffee. The aroma fills the room, a small comfort amidst the chaos. Thomas sighs, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I've been better, Elena. I can't remember what happened, and it's driving me crazy." Elena nods, understanding in her eyes. "I know it's tough, but you can't push yourself too hard. The memories will come back when they're ready." Thomas looks at her, gratitude in his eyes. "Thanks, Elena. I appreciate the support." They sit in silence for a moment before Elena speaks up. "You know, I've been doing some digging of my own. There's something off about this case, Thomas. The witnesses' statements don't add up, and there's a gap in the timeline." Thomas leans forward, interest piqued. "What do you mean?" Elena pulls out a notebook, flipping through the pages. "The call came in at 10 p.m., right? But the first units didn't arrive until 10:15. That's a 5-minute gap, and the witnesses say they saw you fire your weapon around 10:20, but the medical examiner's report puts the time of injury closer to 10:30. Thomas's mind races as he processes this new information. So there's a 10-minute window unaccounted for. What happened during that time? Elena shrugs. "That's what we need to find out. I think someone's trying to cover something up, Thomas. And we need to get to the bottom of it before it's too late." Thomas nods, determination in his eyes. "We need to talk to the witnesses again. Someone must have seen something." The next day they start their unofficial investigation, revisiting the scene of the crime and talking to the neighbors. The atmosphere in the East Side neighborhood is tense, the residents wary of the police. But Thomas and Elena persist, knocking on doors and asking questions. They find an elderly woman who lives across the street from where the shooting occurred. She invites them in, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "I saw everything," she says, her voice trembling. "I saw the man running, and I saw the other officer chasing him." Thomas's heart races. "The other officer?" "What do you mean?" The woman nods. There was another officer there that night. He was chasing the man, and then I heard the shots. But it wasn't you, Lieutenant Mitchell. It was the other officer. Thomas looks at Elena, shock and relief warring within him. We need to find out who this other officer is, he says, his voice steady. And we need to do it fast. As they leave the woman's apartment, Thomas feels a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he can clear his name and find the truth. But he knows the road ahead is fraught with danger, and he must tread carefully. The days turn into weeks as they continue their investigation. They follow every lead, no matter how small. They talk to more witnesses, review surveillance footage, and even consult with experts in ballistics and forensics. Each piece of evidence brings them one step closer to the truth, but also deepens the mystery. Thomas finds solace in the routine of the investigation. It gives him a sense of purpose, a way to channel his frustration and anxiety. He knows that the truth is within reach, and he's determined to uncover it no matter the cost. But the strain of the investigation takes a toll on him. He loses weight, his cheeks hollowing out, and dark circles forming under his eyes. His sleep is plagued by nightmares, fragments of memories that haunt him in the dead of night. One night, he wakes up in a cold sweat, the echo of gunshots ringing in his ears. He stumbles out of bed, his heart pounding in his chest. He makes his way to the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water with shaking hands. He looks out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. He knows he can't give up, not now, not ever. He owes it to himself, to Elena, and to Ahmed Kader to see this through to the end. The revelation of another officer's involvement fuels Thomas and Elena with renewed determination. They know they're treading on dangerous ground, but the pursuit of truth outweighs the risks. They decide to keep their findings under wraps, aware that someone within the department might be involved. Their first stop is the precinct's archives, where they hope to find any discrepancies in the duty roster from that night. They spend hours poring over logs and reports, their eyes scanning every detail. Elena pulls out a roster from the night of the incident, her finger tracing down the list of names. "Look at this," she says, pointing to an entry. Officer Daniels was supposed to be on patrol in the east side that night, but there's no record of him responding to the call. Thomas leans in, his brow furrowed. "That's strange. We need to talk to Daniels." They track down Officer Daniels, finding him on patrol near the city park. She's surprised to see them but agrees to talk. They sit on a bench, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet. The park is quiet, the usual bustle of children and joggers replaced by a serene calm. "We need to ask you about the night of the shooting," Thomas begins, watching Daniel's reaction closely. "You were supposed to be on duty in the east side, right?" Daniels nods, but her eyes shift nervously. "Yeah, but I got held up with another call. I never made it to the scene." Elena presses her. "But you were in the area, right? Did you see anything unusual?" Daniels hesitates before speaking. I saw another officer. He wasn't in uniform, but I recognized him. It was Officer Harris. He was acting strange, like he was hiding something." Thomas's heart pounds in his chest. Officer Harris, a veteran cop with a spotless record. Could he be the missing piece of the puzzle? They thank Daniels and leave, their minds racing with this new information. They know they need to be careful. Accusing a fellow officer without concrete evidence could backfire. Thomas and Elena decide to stake out Harris, following him discreetly over the next few days. They notice his erratic behavior, secretive meetings, late-night visits to the East Side neighborhood. Something is definitely off. One night, they follow Harris to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The warehouse is a relic of the city's industrial past, its rusted walls and broken windows a stark contrast to the gleaming skyscrapers downtown. They watch from a distance as he meets with a group of men, exchanging words and a mysterious package. "We need to get closer," Thomas whispers, his breath visible in the cold night air. They move stealthily, using the shadows as cover. The warehouse is dimly lit, the faint glow of a single bulb casting eerie shadows on the walls. They hear snippets of the conversation, enough to realize that Harris is involved in something illegal. The men he's meeting with are known criminals, their faces familiar from the department's most wanted list. Suddenly, one of the men spots them. Shots ring out, and Thomas and Elena are forced to take cover. They return fire, the warehouse echoing with the sound of gunshots. They manage to escape, but the element of surprise is lost. Back at Thomas's apartment, they catch their breath, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. "We need to take this to the commissioner," Elena says, her voice firm. "We have enough to at least warrant an investigation." Thomas nods, but his mind is elsewhere. He knows they're close to the truth, but the path ahead is treacherous. They must tread carefully or risk losing everything. The next few days are a whirlwind of activity. They compile their findings, building a case against Harris. They know they need ironclad evidence before they can take this to the commissioner. They spend countless hours reviewing surveillance footage, cross-referencing reports, and even consulting with legal experts. One day, as they're reviewing surveillance footage, Elena pauses the video, her eyes narrowing. "Look at this," she says, pointing to a figure in the background. "That's not Harris." Thomas leans in, his heart pounding. The figure is familiar, but he can't quite place him. "Who is that?" Elena rewinds the footage, freezing the frame on the figure's face. "That's Captain Reynolds. He's supposed to be on leave, but he's here, meeting with Harris." Thomas's mind races as he processes this new information. Captain Reynolds, a respected figure in the department, involved in the conspiracy. The web of corruption is more extensive than they thought. They decide to follow Reynolds, their investigation taking a new turn. They tail him discreetly, documenting his every move. They discover that Reynolds is the mastermind behind the operation, pulling the strings from the shadows. The evidence against Reynolds is overwhelming, but they know they need to be careful. Taking down a captain will send shockwaves through the department, and they need to be prepared for the backlash. They present their findings to Commissioner Hayes, who listens with a mix of shock and resolve. "We need to act fast," he says, his voice firm. "We can't let Reynolds slip through our fingers." A plan is set in motion, a sting operation to catch Reynolds red-handed. Thomas and Elena lead the charge, their hearts pounding with a mix of adrenaline and determination. They know that the success of the operation hinges on their every move. The night of the sting, the air is thick with tension. They wait in the shadows, their eyes trained on Reynolds as he meets with his accomplices. The signal is given, and they move in, weapons drawn. "Freeze!" Thomas shouts, his voice echoing through the night. Reynolds looks up, shock and fear etched on his face. He knows it's over. The operation is a success. Reynolds and his accomplices are taken into custody. The department breathes a sigh of relief, the shadow of corruption lifted. But Thomas and Elena know that their work is far from over. The path to justice is long, but they're determined to see it through no matter the cost. The arrest of Officer Harris and Captain Reynolds sends shockwaves through the department. The media descends upon the precinct, hungry for details of the scandal. Thomas and Elena find themselves at the center of a storm, their every move scrutinized by the public eye. Despite the chaos, they remain focused on their goal, to uncover the full extent of the corruption within the department. They work tirelessly, poring over evidence, and following every lead, no matter how small. Their efforts lead them to a series of offshore accounts linked to several high-ranking officials within the department. The trail of money reveals a complex web of bribery and extortion, with Harris and Reynolds acting as the enforcers. The scale of the conspiracy is staggering, and Thomas and Elena realize that they're fighting against a hydra. Cut off one head, and two more grow in its place. But they refuse to back down. They compile their findings, building an ironclad case against the conspirators. They know that bringing down such powerful figures will be dangerous, but they're determined to see justice served. The day of the reckoning arrives. Thomas and Elena stand before a grand jury, presenting their evidence with unwavering conviction. The courtroom is filled with tension as they lay bare the sordid details of the conspiracy. The jury listens intently, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. When the presentation concludes, the room falls silent. The weight of the evidence is undeniable, and the jury retires to deliberate. Hours pass like minutes as Thomas and Elena wait for the verdict. They pace the halls, their minds racing with a mix of hope and anxiety. Finally, the jury returns, their faces solemn. The foreman stands, clearing his throat. On the count of conspiracy to commit bribery and extortion, we find the defendants guilty. A collective gasp echoes through the courtroom. Thomas and Elena exchange a look of relief and triumph. They've done it. They've brought the corrupt to justice. In the aftermath of the trial, the department undergoes a massive overhaul. Commissioner Hayes steps down, replaced by a reform-minded leader, determined to root out the remaining corruption. Thomas and Elena are hailed as heroes, their names synonymous with integrity and courage. But for Thomas, the victory is bittersweet. He thinks of Ahmed Khader, the man whose life was forever altered by the events of that fateful night. He visits Khader in the hospital, finding him surrounded by his family, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Lieutenant Mitchell," Khader says, his voice weak but sincere. "You gave me back my life." Thomas smiles, his heart heavy with emotion. "I'm just glad we could bring the truth to light." As he leaves the hospital, Thomas looks out at the city, a sense of peace washing over him. The road to justice was long and treacherous, but he walked it with unwavering determination. And in the end, the truth prevailed. The city begins to heal, the shadow of corruption slowly lifting. The residents of the East Side neighborhood, once wary of the police, now look to Thomas and Elena with respect and admiration. They know that the battle against corruption is far from over, but they're determined to continue the fight, one step at a time. Thomas and Elena find themselves at a crossroads. They've achieved what they set out to do, but the path forward is unclear. They know that their actions have changed the department forever, and they must now navigate the new landscape they've created. They decide to take some time off, to reflect on their journey and the road ahead. They spend their days exploring the city, rediscovering the beauty and resilience of its people. They know that their fight against corruption is far from over, but they're determined to face whatever challenges come their way. One day, as they sit in a quiet park, watching the world go by, Elena turns to Thomas, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know, we've been through a lot together, but I wouldn't have it any other way." Thomas smiles, gratitude in his eyes. "Neither would I, Elena. Neither would I." As they look out at the city, they know that their journey is far from over, but they're ready to face whatever comes next, together. What an incredible story. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more amazing content.